Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to be going over my grades for the 2021 NBA draft. The way I set it up is that there are 5 different tiers and they're all letter-based tiers. So we got A grade, B grade, C grade, D grade, and F grade. And, depending on how I thought each team did in this year's draft, I assigned them into a letter grade or tier, a category, however you want to put it. So we're going to be starting off with the teams that I think did the best in this year's draft, which I put in A tier. And we're going to be working our way all the way down to F tier. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So to start off this video, we're going to be taking a look at the teams that I have in the A tier, which are the Rockets, Hornets, Clippers, and Nets. To start off, we could take a look at the haul that the Rockets got, as I think they performed the best in this year's draft, and I think they are the clear #1 winner, as they brought home Jalen Green, Alperen Shengun, Uzuman Garuba, as well as Josh Christopher. We could start off with Jalen Green. Whether you preferred them to take Evan Mobley or over Jalen Green is really a personal preference, but Jalen Green, regardless, is going to come in from day one. Be their starting shooting guard. Hopefully he can have some synergy with Kevin Porter Jr. moving forward. He's going to come in from day one and be a three-way scorer for this Rockets team and really be their franchise shooting guard moving forward, as well as their franchise player. Great pick for them, and I wish him nothing but the best in the NBA. I think he's going to go on to do great things. Moving on to Alperen Shengun, a player who I value as a top 5 player in this class, for them to get him at 16 and not only get him at 16, but to acquire him from the Oklahoma City Thunder at 16, that's great value. Whether you view him as a 4 or a 5 long term, especially, alongside Christian Wood, who Christian Wood himself is a tweener big man, right? He's not really a 4. He plays more like a 4, but he's more suited to be more of a 5, right? But defensively, he doesn't really hold up at the 5, even though he does have like some shot blocking tendencies. He's not really all that strong enough to bang with 5. So, Shengun could probably slide into that 5 because he is big enough. And I think, he's definitely going to be an offensive spark plug for this Rockets team. He's probably going to come off the bench in his early days of his career. But I could definitely see him being their long-term center, moving forward, especially with their defensive identity, which they are establishing. As we move on to our next player, Uzuman Garuba, who joins Jae'Sean Tate and Kenyon Martin Jr. to form that forward defensive identity for this team. He's going to come in from day one, be a defensive menace. Offensively, he's probably going to be relegated to, spot up threes, and as well as, probably as a roll man off pick and rolls. But again, that's great value, and where they selected him. He's going to come in and, especially alongside guys like Shengun, Christian Wood, Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., you got Uzuman Garuba, Jae'Sean Tate, and Kenyon Martin Jr. to come in right away and set that defensive tone for this team. And, Uzuman Garuba is big enough where he's going to be able to play multiple positions. So it's a great pick for the Rockets. He's going to come in day one and fit right alongside his teammates. And then finally, we have Josh Christopher, who they selected with their 24th pick. And Josh Christopher is going to come off the bench for them and be a bucket getter. I spoke about how they need a couple guys off the bench who, can just space the floor. Josh Christopher, I wasn't a big fan of him, but, coming into Houston where it's already such a guard-heavy team, right? You got John Wall, Jalen Green, KPJ. Josh Christopher is going to come off the bench in the beginning of his career, and he's probably just going to be relegated to, spot up opportunities, which is good for him, right? You can see the talent with him. You can see the shot making talent, but he needs to reel it back. And I think Houston and Stephen Silas is a great landing spot for him. Maybe not the perfect landing spot, but I think it's a very good landing spot for him. They're going to relegate him to catch and shoot opportunities in the beginning of his career, and they're going to ease in his shot making abilities as time goes on. Looking at Houston's draft haul, I mean, it's a 10 out of 10. They knocked it completely out the ballpark, right? They got their franchise player at the 2 guard. They got a great big man prospect, the second best big in this class. They got arguably the best defensive forward in this class. You can make an argument Uzuman Garuba is right up there with, Scottie Barnes or Franz Wagner as the best defensive wing in this class. And then they got a spark plug, shooting guard, or I think Josh Christopher is going to be big enough where he could play some small ball 3 minutes in the NBA. So they really filled out every position here, right? Point guard's not really a need as they already have John Wall as well as Kevin Porter Jr., but this haul is great. Houston filled in every position, and they could be making some noise as soon as, probably not next year, but the year after that. Once these guys continue to gel with their current teammates and get some minutes in the NBA. But 10 out of 10 haul from the Rockets. I'm very happy for this team. Get some excitement in this team going forward. As they move on from the James Harden era. And moving on to the team that I thought had the second best draft class this year, I said that I think that it's the Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte Hornets drafted James Bogdanite with their 11th pick. They traded for my Knicks' 19th pick and took Kai Jones. They traded for JT Thor in the second round and took Scottie Lewis with their later second round pick. Again, this is an awesome haul for this team, right? James Bogdanite. You guys know me. I spoke about this last night. James Bogdanite, I value as a top 4 player in this class, and for them to get him at 11, that's great value. He's so talented. He could end up starting from day one. I could definitely see that being a possibility, just given how physically gifted he is, as well as how just talented he is with the rock. He's just an athletic freak. He's going to be a 3-way scorer from day one, and I love his fit, especially with this team, right? Because if there's one weakness with James Bogdanite, it's his shot selection, especially from behind the arc. I think that's why he shot so poorly in college. He kind of needs to reel it back a little. And, playing with players like Terry Rozier, Devontae Graham, LaMelo Ball, he's not going to have to worry about that. He's just going to have to worry about catching and shooting from behind the arc. So, again, that's going to be a situation similar to Josh Christopher, where he's going to be eased into his shot-making ability. He's not going to have to go crazy with the rock from day one, which is great for him. And he could, again, like I said, he could take over this starting shooting guard spot, from day one or possibly moving into the season. He's that level of a player. I think he's that talented, and he's a great fit with LaMelo Ball going forward. They filled their need for a long-term center with Kai Jones, which I think is a great pick. Kai Jones or Isaiah Jackson. I prefer Isaiah Jackson a little bit more, but Kai Jones, I'm not going to give you slack. I'm not going to give the Hornets slack for taking Kai Jones over Isaiah Jackson. He's an athletic freak. He moves very well for a big man. He looks like a big wing sometimes, the way he can handle the ball on the perimeter sometimes with the flashes that he's shown, as a perimeter shot maker. But he's going to be a rim roller in the beginning of his career, and he's going to need some work. I still see Cody Zeller and Bismack Biyombo, getting more minutes over him in the beginning of his career, and I see him be, they have to ease him in, as he's a very raw prospect, but he has 3-point. He's shown 3-point shot making potential. So I think, it's a very intriguing prospect moving forward for the Hornets at a position where they really need one. And, at that 19th pick, you can make an argument between, again, him or Isaiah Jackson. But I think, Kai Jones is arguably the best big man at that spot at a position that they need. Can't go wrong there. And the reason why I really love this Hornets, besides James Bogdanite and Kai Jones, I didn't get to this last night, but they got JT Thor from the Pistons, which is why I don't have the Pistons spoiler in A tier, just because they traded away JT Thor. But JT Thor is such an incredible prospect. I have him valued right outside my top 10. I believe it was at 11. But he's 6'9", moves super well, has shown playmaking flashes, is a great shooter for his size, especially given how young he is, how recently he picked up basketball. His defensive awareness is great. I think he's going to go on to be a 2-way monster in the NBA. I think he's the biggest sleeper in this class. I think it was the biggest steal for the Hornets in this class, especially at 37, to trade for him. If he can fill out his game, as well as Kai Jones filling out if both him and Kai Jones can fill out their games, Charlotte is going to be scary moving forward, especially given James Bogdanite, and you got LaMelo Ball and that young core that they already have, as well as picking up Scottie Lewis at the end of the second round. I'm not expecting much from Scottie Lewis in the NBA. It might be, a defensive stopper, at times when he does go out there, maybe a cutter. I think I could see him having a role as, a defensive stopper and a cutter in the NBA, not much of a shooter. But, those three guys, and Bogdanite, Jones, and JT Thor, that's such a great haul. And, Charlotte got much better immediately just from this draft class, and free agency hasn't even started. So very, very happy for Charlotte fans. Again, a city that's been lacking excitement, and you get, a great draft haul with these three guys, and as well as Scottie Lewis. But, these three guys really carries this draft haul. Moving forward to, I think, the team that had the third best draft this year, and I have the Clippers. And most of you guys will probably be like the Clippers and the Nets, but I mean, the Clippers got great value, right? Kawhi's probably not going to play next year, so they said, let's just go with the youth movement. And, they traded for Keon Johnson from my Knicks. And I think he's going to be a great fit on this team, especially, as they like to go small. He could play. I would imagine he could play small ball center for them, small ball for the Clippers. He's probably going to operate as a roll man, as a cutter in the early stages of his career, as he continues to work on his jump shot. Not going to take any shots off the dribble, and if he does take threes, it's probably just going to be corner threes. But I expect him to be cutting a lot, and with the offensive firepower that they have on that team on the perimeter, assuming that they retain guys like Reggie Jackson and on a lower value, Nicholas Batum, right? You still have Paul George there, right? Paul George will be on the perimeter. You still got Reggie Jackson creating shots. You got guys like Terrence Mann out there. You got guys like Luke Kennard. Patrick Beverley can get hot at times, right? So you got a lot of perimeter guys that can space the floor. You can have Keon Johnson there setting screens for guys rolling to the basket. And even though he's not all that tall, with that 48-inch vertical, I expect him to get up there and be an effective roll man in the NBA just because of that, again, that 48-inch vertical. And again, on the defensive end, they not as good as you would have thought defensively. They were right around league average defensively. And Keon Johnson is going to come in. I think he's going to be a great defender. So I think it's a great fit with the Clippers. Excuse me. Moving on to the next pick, they got Jason Preston, I believe with the 31st or 32nd pick. Again, Jason Preston is another guy that I had valued in the top 20 in this draft class. I really love Jason Preston. I've compared him to like high school LaMelo Ball. That's kind of how he plays. Great playmaker, great passer, especially at the pick and roll, can make every pass in the book. And he really gives this Clippers team something that they don't have, and a high level facilitator at that 6'4" size. And he's gotten better every single year in college at Ohio. So I expect him to do the same thing in the NBA. And his shot is a little wonky, but he did hit a good amount of shots in college. And he's not much of a defender, but again, that playmaking ability that he does have, brings something to this Clippers team that they don't already have. And then BJ Boston, again, in the later of the second round, great value add for this team. A guy who could come off the bench for them, probably going to play some G League minutes, but again, a guy who they can ease in, right? A young prospect who was highly touted in high school, still has that physical talent, God-gifted ability. And I think he definitely needs to work on his game, but he's landing in a great situation where he can learn from guys like Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, stay in that G League, stay in the G League, and depending on how the season does go with the Clippers, especially with Kawhi probably not gonna see the floor all that much, probably not until the end of the season. You could probably even get BJ Boston some NBA experience until Kawhi comes back, maybe at the end of the season, and they're ready to compete for the playoffs. And if they're not in the playoff race, then you throw these three guys out there and let them compete, especially BJ Boston is going to need that NBA experience. But I think this is a great draft class for the Clippers, going with that youth movement again, as Kawhi is going to be out this year, and you get a guy like Keon Johnson who's going to fit in with this team right away, especially on the defensive end and the offensive end as a cutter and as a roll man. Jason Preston is going to bring some high level playmaking that this team doesn't have, especially at that 6'4" size. And BJ Boston, that young touted, God gifted prospect that they could bring along as time goes on. Right, they filled a hole with every player that they selected, right? They needed perimeter. They needed some more, both perimeter defense, but I think Keon Johnson is going to be able to hang his own with some forwards especially hang his own in the post in the NBA. As he's not only strong, but again with that athletic ability, I think he could be a menace as a help side blocker. He's going to get a lot of highlights as a help side blocker, and I think that's going to be he's going to get a lot of highlights off that at the NBA level. He's going to be able to run the floor great. Jason Preston with that playmaking ability, they don't really have a playmaker like him on this roster. And, BJ Boston, again, a guy they can bring in. So they got three completely different players, but three different players that's going to be positive value for this team right away. In Keon Johnson and Jason Preston, and BJ Boston gives them a young prospect who they could potentially move for something, at the trade deadline. And even if these guys don't fit with this team, these are three intriguing prospects that the Clippers could even package and get something worthwhile at the trade deadline. So whether they want to keep them and develop them and have them as valuable assets for this team moving forward, which I think these players are capable of, I think they could do that. And if they want to trade them to get something, to get more of like a win now player, I think that's an option as well for the Clippers. But again, to get these young players, add some versatility to this team, add more talent, you can never go wrong with that. Especially these three players as talented as these three are, that's an A in my book. And then moving on to my last A, I have the Brooklyn Nets. New York Knicks fan all day till the day I die. It pains me to put the Nets in A, but they really killed this draft. They really killed this draft. At 27, getting that best player available in Cam Thomas. He's gonna get buckets off the bench for this Nets team. He's going to come in and have a day one impact. Deyron Sharp, a big man who was a bit, Deyron Sharp, I have a love-hate relationship with, because if you watch the highlights, you see the potential, especially on the offensive end with him. But I think defensively, he does have a little bit of work to do, but I think he's going to be able to at least survive at the NBA level right off the bat. But he's filling a need for Brooklyn. And he was the best center available by the time that he was selected by them. So, again, that's a great pick for them. Kessler Edwards later in the second round, a 6'7", two-way wing. Can never go wrong with that. Again, a position of need. Marcus Zegarowski and Raquan Gray, I don't see those two getting too much playing time. But, again, those top three and Cam Thomas, getting that spark plug off the bench, at times for Brooklyn this year, especially later on in the playoffs, even if Kyrie and Harden were hurt, the offense was pretty stagnant with just KD out there. Even though they have a lot of shooters, they don't really have guys who, you can give the rock to and kind of take some pressure off KD. And, Cam Thomas is going to come in there and with these three guys being as injury prone as they were last year, Cam Thomas is going to be that consistent, for this team, and is going to get buckets. He's a professional bucket getter, a three-way scorer. At that 6'4" frame with long arms. He's going to come in there from day one for this Brooklyn team and get buckets, something that they need, another scorer outside of their main three. Deyron Sharp, a big man, the best big man on the board, has a lot of offensive potential. I think he's an intriguing playmaker for a big man. I think he's a solid athlete, especially around the rim. And I think he has value as a shot blocker, but I don't know how much he's gonna actually see the floor for Brooklyn, just because of he could be a bit of a liability in the pick and roll game from day one in the NBA. But again, the best center on the board, a position of need for them, so they knocked it out with that pick. And then again, Kessler Edwards, a player that I really like. I had him right in the beginning of the second round. He slid to the mid second round, 6'7" wing. Two-way player, and they filled three positions of need, and the other two, I'm not sure how much playing time they are going to get, but I see the first three picks that they selected getting playing time from day one. So again, these four teams, they all filled not only positions of need, but they got the best player available, value picks at the time that they were selecting. So again, these are the four teams that I have in the A grade, and I think these are the biggest winners of the 2021 NBA draft. Moving on to the B tier, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. First up, their only draft pick in this year's draft was Evan Mobley, who I think is going to slide into the four spot for this team. I expect him to re-sign Jared Allen. He's going to help establish a defensive foundation along with him and Isaac Okoro. Which has great synergy, considering their point guard as defensive woes and Darius Garland, and depending on whether or not they keep Colin Sexton, I think Evan Mobley is going to come in from day one and be their best player, as well as their franchise player, their best prospect on the team. And the selection of Evan Mobley is not the problem for me with the Cavs. The problem with the Cavs is their lack of moves, in terms of trying to acquire more draft picks and add more young talent to this team. I do know that they did trade Taurean Prince, which was a good move for them, but I expected them to do more in terms of, looking to trade, Larry Nance, as I previously mentioned in my Cleveland video, maybe searching the market for guys like Cedi Osman or Kevin Love, or they could have bought draft picks like what the Brooklyn Nets did. I think they should have made it a bigger priority to add, young talent, especially with as good of a class as this is. Which they just didn't do, and that's the only reason why I do have them in the B category. But again, with picking Evan Mobley at 3, their franchise player. But again, my biggest gripe with Cleveland in this year's draft was their lack of aggressiveness in terms of obtaining more talent, whether that's through buying draft picks or trading their veterans. Moving on to the next team that I have in the B category, I have the Detroit Pistons, who walked away with Cade Cunningham, Luka Garza, Isaiah Rivers, and Boza Koprivica. We could start. I'm not really going to talk about Cade. I've already talked about Cade in length. Obviously, he's the number one pick. He's going to come and be their franchise player. Luka Garza, I don't expect to get too much NBA time just because of his lack of, speed at the NBA level, as well as his defensive weaknesses at the NBA level, as his lack of foot speed, his lack of pick and roll defense, and he's not much of a rim protector, so he's going to be, extreme liability on that end of the floor in the NBA. I'd be very shocked if he does get any NBA playing time. The same thing with Isaiah Livers. But Bolza Koprivica, I really like him. He's one of my favorite international prospects in this class. I'm not sure whether or not he is going to come to the United States right away, or he's going to spend another year or two overseas. But I do really like his game. As your prototypical forward, he's got good playmaking instincts, and I think he's going to be able to space the floor for this Pistons team. And I think he can come in and have an impact from day one. And again, whether or not he comes to the United States right away is a question. But another big reason why I have Detroit in the B category is because they traded away JT Thor, a guy who I value as a top 15 prospect in this class. With his youth, his height, his intangibles, and has his touch, his skill set on both ends of the floor, given how young he is and how little basketball he's really played over the course of his life. I think they took him with the 37th pick and traded it to Charlotte. And as I previously mentioned, with the Charlotte in the A category. But again, trading away JT Thor is a big reason why I have Detroit in the B category. But, outside of Cade Cunningham, you got to take a look at their draft haul as a whole. And, I don't expect Garza or Livers to get much playing time in the NBA. And I expect Bolza to get a lot of playing time in the NBA. But the question is whether or not he is going to come overseas, come to the United States right off the bat. And, trading away a player with as much potential as JT Thor does hinder Detroit. But, Cade Cunningham does carry this draft haul, and, I couldn't put them any lower than B because, at the end of the day, they are getting the best player in this class. But, with their other four picks, really, they traded away arguably who would have been their second best player in their draft haul. And with Garza's not going to get that much NBA time, neither is Livers. And I'm not sure if Bulls is going to come over to the NBA right away. And that's why I have Detroit in this B category, not because of Cade, but because of the other picks and, them trading away JT Thor, who, I really like. I value him as a top 15 player in this class. Moving on to the Magic, they walked away from this draft with Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner at 5 and 8. We can start off with Jalen Suggs. Orlando has another point guard that can't shoot. They went from, Elfrid Payton to now having three of them really, and Markelle Fultz, Cole Anthony, and Jalen Suggs. No, I'm just messing around. But, Jalen Suggs, I do value. I think he's going to be a great role player in the NBA. I've said this in my big board as well. He's not going to be a star. I think he's going to be a very good piece to the puzzle. And you could say the same thing for their next player, Franz Wagner. I think Franz Wagner is you could slide him in at the 3 spot. You could slide him in at the 4 spot. And I think if the Magic do want to go small, he can slide in at the 5 spot as well. And, given all these ball handlers, I think he is going to see playing time, as a cutter. I think he's going to have, some ability as a corner 3-point shooter to start off his career. I think his shot is going to be inconsistent when he does come into the NBA. I think it's going to take some time to get to league average, but I do think he's a great playmaker, especially at that 6'9", 6'10" size, which I think is going to help him see the floor. But again, just like Suggs, they're both good role players, and that's the reason why I do have the Magic in B. Even if they might have been the safest picks on the board, even considering the fact that Jalen Suggs did fall into the Magic's lap, they're in the beginning of a rebuild. You take a look at the other young players on this team, in Fultz, Anthony, RJ Hampton, Isaac, Chuma Okeke, Wendell Carter Jr. None of these guys are going to be like true stars, and neither are Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner. So now Orlando really has a team of all solid young pieces, but there's not that one true star. And I would have loved for the Magic to have taken, I think James Bogdanite would have been perfect for this team. I would have even preferred them to have taken Jonathan Kuminga here over Jalen Suggs. This is just my personal opinion, but the reason why I have the Magic, they got two very good players who I think are going to be positive impact players, but none of them are going to be that star that Orlando needs, right? Orlando has been lacking, that true star level player for so many years now since Dwight Howard left, and they really haven't, they haven't had, that true star since Dwight Howard left. And I think, 2 picks in the top 10 was their chance to take swings because they already have so many great, positive impact players. None of them stars, but, positive impact players nonetheless on their roster already. So, to take 2 more positive impact, they're still going to be good players, but they're not going to be stars, which I think the Magic should have taken a swing on at least one of these picks, swung for the fences for like a Kuminga or a Bogdanite with either of their picks. So again, Magic you can make an argument they got both of the players that they took were the best players on the board at their respective picks. But again, neither of them were, are truly high ceiling level players. And that's the reason why I have the Magic in the B category. Moving on to the next team, I have the Golden State Warriors, who walked away from this draft class with Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody at 7 and 14. I'm not too big of a fan of the Kuminga pick for the Warriors, considering the fact that, this is really the twilight years of Curry's prime, and Clay isn't going to come back the same from his injuries. Draymond is already starting to deteriorate. I think they need as many win now players as they can get. And, Kuminga is not that. I have questions about Kuminga on really both sides of the floor. I have questions about his touch from all 3 levels on the offensive end. His free throw numbers weren't great. His 3-point percentages weren't great. I've seen people say, oh, well, he has a knack of scoring. He's got the will. It's like, that's great. So does a player like Kelly Oubre. Like, Kelly Oubre is a dog that goes and get his. Does that mean that Kelly Oubre is necessarily like a positive impact player? No. And the same thing for Jonathan Kuminga. I think maybe you can make an argument that maybe Kerr learned from James Wiseman. And it knows how to better bring along a raw player. But again, as highly picked as Kuminga was, I think Golden State should have gone with another ready now player. And considering the fact that I expect Wiseman to take a step next year, but I don't know how big that step is going to be. I still expect him to be a raw player. And Kuminga is definitely going to be raw coming into the NBA on offense as on defense as well. So that's already 2 players that aren't going to necessarily be positive impact players. And you could basically already scratch this off as 1 year of Curry's prime that the Warriors aren't really going to be truly competing. But this Moses Moody pick at 14 is what really carries this Warriors draft class for me. That's great value at 14. I was shocked that he slid, at that 6'5", 6'6" height, that 7-foot wingspan, that smooth touch, that IQ on both sides of the floor. Moses Moody, you can make an argument, could start day one, could eventually, maybe not day one, but as the season goes on, I definitely see him be inserted into that Warriors starting lineup. I think he's going to be a great 2-way role player for them, a ready to win now player for them, despite how young he is. His IQ, having played along great players his entire life, he knows how to fit in. And at the same time, you'd like to see him be a bit more assertive. And I think if he comes off the bench, really plays with that bench unit, which, was a struggle for Golden State last season, I think he could come in and get up some shot reps with that bench unit. But again, I think it's a good draft haul for Golden State. Don't get me wrong. But the goal here is to help Curry out, help Curry try to win another championship in the twilight years of his prime. I don't think Kuminga is going to help them do that, but I think Moses Moody definitely will. But again, Kuminga and Wiseman moving forward, that's a very intriguing, young duo moving forward for this Warriors team. But in terms of actually winning games next year for Curry and Clay and Draymond to a lesser extent, I don't think they're going to help them. But Moses Moody, I definitely see do having an impact from day one. So that's the reason why I have Golden State in the B category. Moving on to the Hawks, going to quickly talk about them. They walked away with Jalen Johnson in the first round and Sharif Cooper in the second. Great value for them. Jalen Johnson is, I think I've said that he's the biggest boom or bust prospect in this class, and I do stand by that. With his size, playmaking instincts, defensive instincts as well. His shot does need some work. I think really his entire game needs work, but he's a very raw prospect that Atlanta can bring along slowly, especially since they're competing now, and he's going to be buried behind all the forwards that they do have on this roster already. In Cam Reddish, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, but he's probably going to play in the G League to start off his career, and they're probably going to work him along slowly, and he can be a trade chip for Atlanta moving forward. and as well as Sharif Cooper. Sharif Cooper, you can make an argument he's going to come in and be their backup point guard from day one. I don't know how valuable he is going to be, especially in that playoff setting. I think Atlanta might prefer to get another, veteran point guard. But, to add players like Jalen Johnson and Sharif Cooper in your farm, moving forward, whether or not you want to use them, whether or not you want to develop them and have them be a part of your team moving forward, or you want to keep them in your farm and then include them in a trade to acquire a more win now player. Same thing, I think that's definitely an option for Atlanta. Similar to excuse me, I had a brain fart there. Similar to the Clippers, right? What the Clippers did with Preston and BJ Boston and Keon Johnson, similar to what the Hawks are doing. You add more youth at positions that you do need, right? The Hawks desperately needed a backup point guard, and they do need another young power forward considering how old Gallo is already. So it's great value for the Hawks. Not truly elite prospects, which is the reason why I couldn't necessarily put them in the A tier. They only walked away with two players. But Jalen Johnson and Sharif Cooper, both very solid players, who they can enter in their farm, both at positions of need. And both players in the mold of what, they could use, right? Sharif Cooper's a great playmaker who they can bring off the bench, right? Run their offense when Trey isn't there. And Jalen Johnson, much more of in my opinion, defensive-minded forward as opposed to, someone like John Collins, who's heavily on the offense, who leans heavily towards the offensive side of the ball. But regardless, two great picks for the Hawks. Again, I don't see them being, high-impact players for them moving forward. I'm not really all that big on either player, but, you could see the potential of them working out. And then, whether they're going to be drafting stash players or the Hawks decide to develop them. Both two solid picks for them. And then moving forward to the next team that I have in the B category, and I have my New York Knicks, who I made a video on before. I'm not going to talk too much about their draft. I didn't mention Jericho Sims. Jericho Sims wasn't selected at the time of my video that I made last night. But again, Jericho Sims is I'm not the biggest fan. I've seen a lot of Knicks fans, go crazy over Jericho Sims, calling him the next Dwight Howard. It's just ridiculous Knicks fans. I'm a Knicks fan myself, and I can admit that we're pretty ridiculous. Jericho Sims is not going to be Dwight Howard. He's not nearly as fast or as freakishly athletic as Dwight Howard is. He's a very big body, basically a rim roller. I do have concerns about him on the defensive end in the NBA level just because of his lack of foot speed. But I do think he was a solid pick at 58, good, solid value there. I already went over Miles McBride and Rokas and Quentin Grimes, but the only reason why I do have us in the B category is that 19th pick. The more I slept on it, I thought about it some more. I looked at some other people. I looked at people that valued that pick very high. That thought it was a good move to trade it, and I've seen other people that were very upset that we did trade that pick. But again, as I stated last night, they traded the pick to the Hornets that became Kai Jones. And one comment on the video yesterday really helped give me a different perspective on that trade. I said I was indifferent to it, but somebody did comment that we're helping out a rival team that's in a similar situation to us. A team a descending team in the East that's trying to establish a playoff consistency. And to help out a team like that, I'm not sure if that was the right pick, especially, they got a player in Kai Jones, which as I previously stated when I went over them, was a position of need for them. So I'm not a big fan of that. And then if it doesn't convey next year, it is lottery protected, and there's a good chance that they do end up in the lottery. I expect them to be in the play-in tournament, whether they win or not. I do expect them to compete there. But if it's lottery protected, so there's a good chance that we don't even get the pick. And if it doesn't get picked, then it's 2 second-round picks the following year. So we should have just stayed at 19 and taken a player. That's just my opinion. That's the reason why I have us at the B tier. But I do think it was a very solid haul overall for us. Moving on to the 76ers, they ended up with Jaden Springer, Philip Petrusev, and as well as Charles Bassey. Jaden Springer, I think, is an awesome fit. Even if they do keep Ben Simmons as a guy who can play on and off the ball, who can run the offense, 6'4" guard. I think he's going to be a sound defender. I think he's going to be able to guard both ones and twos at the NBA level. Philip Petrusev, he's a very solid wing with shooting capabilities, who I could see getting minutes for Philly eventually. But I really love that Jaden Springer pick. I think he's going to be able to fit day one next to, a player like Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons. I expect him to be in the rotation from day one. And Charles Bassey is, the Dwight Howard replacement as center moving forward for this Philly team. And this just gives them more ammunition to add to, a future trade. And the reason why I have them at B, I was thinking about putting them in A, but these aren't really like Brooklyn, for example. Cam Thomas is going to be a high level impact player for them from day one. You could say the same thing about Deyron Sharp. He could have that impact from day one. I could even see Kessler Edwards coming in and being a rotation player for Brooklyn. And, I like Petrusev, but I don't know if he's going to have that day one impact for Philly. And the same thing can be said for Charles Bassey, but I definitely do see that with Jaden Springer. And I think they are solid picks, and you could see their fit both now and moving forward for this team. And again, it's more trade ammunition similar to Atlanta, as well as a team like the Clippers and potentially even Brooklyn. Brooklyn could take those young guys and potentially trade them. But again, Jaden Springer is going to be able to be a great fit from day one. Petrusev is probably going to be traded. I could see Petrusev and Bassey being traded. I could really see all three of them being traded, but I'm not sure if Petrusev is going to have, the impact, or he's going to be in the rotation from day one. But you could see the potential fit with all three of these players, as all three of these players fit around Ben and Joel. Really, Joel, I think they all, and including Ben as well. But I doubt Ben will be there next season. But I really like the haul for the 76ers, but I don't know if any of these guys are really going to have like that as much of an impact as I can see Cam Thomas having with Brooklyn. And that's the reason why I have Philly in the B category. And then the last team in the B category, I know it's a very long category, but I have the Bulls, and their only pick was Ayo Dosunmu, but I think it's an awesome pick. A lot of people value him as a first round talent. And he fell to the Bulls at, I believe, 38. He's a hometown kid. Went to high school in Chicago, played for Illinois in college. Is going to be a great two-way guard for them. Honestly, he could be their day one starter at that point guard position. I don't think he's the best playmaker in the world, but I do think he's going to be serviceable at the NBA level. A defensive-minded guard who I think he's going to have great synergy next to Zach LaVine, and I think he's going to have success at the NBA level as a catch-and-shoot player. I think he's going to be a very good role player at that guard spot, and I think he fills a great position of need for Chicago. And Chicago is in my opinion, one of the worst states of any franchise in the NBA. They're kind of in NBA. They're directly in NBA no man's land. And they kind of took the step of cementing themselves in NBA no man's land when they did trade for Nikola Vucevic, and they lost their first round pick this year, as they don't really have all that many young players, all that many assets. But, I do see Ayo Dosunmu having a high impact for them from day one. And even though they only had one player, getting Ayo Dosunmu at 38, I think was great value. And that's the reason why I have them in the B tier. And that is the end of the B tier, as we are going to go on to the C tier. Next up, taking a look at the teams in the C category, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, who walked away from this draft with a haul of Josh Giddey, Trey Mann, Aaron Wiggins, and Jeremiah Robinson Earl. We can start off with Josh Giddey, who a lot of people, especially Thunder fans, there was that picture floating around with all his weaknesses, and everybody's like, oh, well, he's basically just bad at basketball. That's just not true. Josh Giddey, I thought, was a very good pick for Oklahoma City. At 6, I value him as a top 10 pick, as a top 10 prospect in this class. So for them to take him at 6, I think it's a great fit moving forward. They needed that playmaker next to Shea, as I think Shea's a good, not great passer. Now they have a guy like Josh Giddey, who immediately comes into this team and is the best playmaker, even with a guy like Kemba on the team, especially at that 6'8", 6'9" size. Moving forward, he's going to be very intriguing on this Thunder team, as they add him to their young core of Shea and Lou Dort and Poku. And, I think I'm perfectly fine with that pick. But then we move forward to Trey Mann. I like Trey Mann. I love Trey Mann as a prospect, but I'm not sure about his fit with this team. I did say that they did need scoring, but, when you already took Josh Giddey, you add another guard to this team when you already have a guy like Teo Maledon and, again, a guy like Shea. It's a bit redundant. I think they do need some work at the forward spot. I think it would have been wiser to take a player like Kuminga at 6 and then go with Trey Mann at 18. But Josh Giddey could potentially slide down to the forward position for this Thunder team. But again, he's best with the ball in his hands. And if he does slide down to 3, the ball, it's just not going to be in his hands. Now I could see a world where Josh Giddey plays the 3 on defense, but on offense he runs the offense. You have Trey Mann running around screens and stuff, spacing the floor for a guy, and then for a guy like Shea. And then you could have like Lou Dort at the 4, and then whoever you want to throw at the 5. I could see that potentially working out, but again, the fit is a bit questionable, as they essentially have 4 or 5 guards on the roster at this point in time. As much as I love Trey Mann, I'm not sure about. I really question the fit. If considering they already took a guard with Josh Giddey, maybe you could say the best player available on the board was Trey Mann, which in my opinion, he was the best player on the board at that point in time. But again, you already took a guard so highly at 6, and then you take another guard at 18. It didn't really make too much sense to me. Aaron Wiggins is a player I like. I had him valued as a mid-second round pick, and that's right around where he went. Middle to the later second round pick is where he went. But again, a two-way player out of Michigan State. I really like him. I'm not sure if he's going to get playing time right off the bat. Same thing with their next player, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who is another player that I really like. But he has questions with the limited offensive upside. I think he's going to come in and be a great defender, both on and off the ball. I think he's very versatile in that end of the floor, and he has a great IQ. And I think he has potential as a stretch big, but offensively is really where he's going to struggle. And again, I question his impact from day one on this team. But I think that the problem with me isn't necessarily a Jeremiah Robinson Earl pick, or really even the Aaron Wiggins pick. I think those are both solid picks. It's really just the Josh Giddey, Trey Mann fit, and as well as trading away Alperen Şengün. I really did not understand that. Even if they did get future assets from the Houston Rockets, it just didn't make sense. I thought Alperen Şengün, when it came to this, I had it mocked to the Thunder already, and I think he would have been a great fit for this team. A team that they traded away Al Horford and Moses Brown. I thought he could have came into this team and slid in at that 5 spot and been their center of the future. And they traded him away for future assets, which they really didn't draft another big man outside of Robinson Earl. And again, I doubt whether or not he's going to get significant playing time from day one. Which I thought Shengun could have came in and had that impact. Now, had they had, Shengun and kept them at 16, I think that the Thunder would have been in the B category. But, given the fact that they traded away Shengun and, the Giddey, Trey Mann, both guard picks, when you have Kemba Walker, Teo Maledon, and Shea already on the roster, I would have been fine with them taking one of those players. But, you take 2 guards, and, they're both guards with intriguing upside. So I think they're both going to need playing time in the NBA to flesh out their games. And, Josh Giddey, the Thunder invested a top 6 pick in him, so obviously he's going to get that playing time. And it really bothers me that Trey Mann is probably going to get the short end of the stick and, not see as much playing time as he necessarily deserves. So that's really my biggest gripe with it. It's just the fit of their top 2 picks in this draft. I like the Aaron Wiggins and Earl pick, even if I doubt their playing, if I doubt their ability to play for this team from day one. But again, the fit of Giddey and Trey Mann is why I have them so low. And as well as, trading Shengun. I really did not like that move at all for this team. I think he would have been great for this team. I think he would have slid in as their starting center from day one. And the fact that they traded him away, and again, with the fit with Giddey and Mann, with the guards already on the roster that they have, I could see it potentially working out, but it's just so many guards. And, Josh Giddey needs the ball in his hands. He needs to be running the offense. So it's a very questionable fit in my opinion. And, trading Shengun was a very, very bad move for this Thunder team, in my opinion. Moving forward to the second team that I have in the C category, I have the Indiana Pacers, who walked away from this draft with a haul of Chris Duarte and Isaiah Jackson. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Chris Duarte. I wanted my Knicks to take him at 19. And the Pacers maybe reached for him a little bit. You heard rumblings that teams might be interested in him in the lottery. But I'm not too sure why the Pacers were the team to pick him. You take into account, similar like the Magic, the Pacers have been in no man's land with Sabonis and Turner and Brogdon and, Karis LeVert. I could see Chris Duarte fits on their team, right? Chris Duarte fits on any NBA team, really. But the Pacers need to do something to get out of no man's land, whether that's pushing in all their chips, which, Chris Duarte helps them win now. But, that's not really what they need. They need to, in my opinion, I would prefer for them to just tear it all down and rebuild. And even if they were going to stay where they were, they didn't take anybody with, intriguing upside. They took Isaiah Jackson, who was their next pick. They already have Domantas Sabonis, who's really a center. Miles Turner, they're starting center now. And they already took Goga Bitadze, 3 years ago now. So, Isaiah Jackson is going to be buried behind all those centers as much as I like Isaiah Jackson as a prospect. And, taking Chris Duarte as high as they did, they didn't bank on upside on any wings. And Chris Duarte certainly doesn't have all that much upside. He's already 24 years old. He's going to come into the NBA and be a valuable role player, but that's about all he's going to be. He's not going to be a star or anything, especially at that age. He's already older than most, young NBA stars. So, to expect him to develop into anything more than, a quality starter, a very good role player is asking for too much. And I think the Pacers should have definitely banked on upside with one of their with the 13th pick for sure. And then the Isaiah Jackson selection is questionable to me, just because of how many players they already have at that center position. And it's not like the Thunder, right, where the Thunder have Teo Maledon is like a questionable NBA player. Kemba Walker might not be on the team. It's like, no, the Pacers, you can make an argument that their top 3 players on the roster, 2 of those are centers, in Sabonis and Turner. And then Isaiah Jackson, it just doesn't make sense to me. They already have so many big men. Unless they're planning to tear it all down, which I think is a plausible option. Then I could see that working out. But again, you already have Goga Bitadze on the roster, so it's like, why not? Why didn't you just go for like a wing or like another guard? And then Chris Duarte, it's just extremely limited upside as he's already 24 years old. Both good players, but one of them, their fit is going to be buried in the rotation unless the Indiana decides to blow it up, and the other one is just going to be a good starter. And for a team in NBA's no man's land, in a small market where they're not going to attract a lot of free agents, and and they're not going to attract any free agents, and never mind them actually having the salary cap to acquire those free agents. They should have banked on a young player with a lot high upside, and they just didn't. I think that was priority 1 for this Pacers team in the draft, and they just didn't do that. So that's why they end up with at C. The only reason why they weren't lower is because the players that they did acquire were very good players, and Chris Duarte and Isaiah Jackson. But again, one has limited upside, and the other is going to be buried in their center rotation. Moving on to the third team that I have in the C tier, I have the New Orleans Pelicans, and they walked away from this draft with Trey Murphy and Herbert Jones. We can start off with Trey Murphy, who I love this player, and I love his fit with this Pelicans team. Being a 6'9", two-way wing who's going to be able to knock down threes, space the floor for Zion and Ingram, as well as being a strong on-ball defender, and has potential as a off-ball defender for this New Orleans Pelicans team. I think he's going to come in and fill a hole from day one. But this is a Pelicans team that they need more stars. I understand that the center position is now filled with Jonas Valanciunas. But they need a shooting guard. I think they definitely need a starting 2 guard. And I would have been a fan of them going with a player like Quentin Grimes, or a player with much more on ball creation potential. Right, similar to the Indiana Pacers, where they need a little bit, where they do need players with high upside, but they need to find players. I thought they needed to find players that were right in the middle of, players with upside, but also players that could help contribute from day one. And Trey Murphy is going to be able to contribute for the Pelicans from day one, but I'm not necessarily sure about how much upside he has, as he's already, 21 years old, and he hasn't shown all that many flashes as, an on-ball creator, as an on-ball shot creator. Then the Herbert Jones pick is similar. He's going to be, a solid role player at that forward spot for this Pelicans team. But again, they have big holes at that point guard spot. I love Kyrie. I was a big fan of Kylie Lewis coming out of the draft. He's kind of disappointed a little bit in the NBA. But I do expect him to get more ample opportunity, at that guard spot, as well as, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and, depending on what happens with Lonzo Ball or not. But I do think that, the Pelicans need that third shot creator, and, one that could really space the floor for this Pelicans team. I think that Quentin Grimes would have been a great pick here, and I think Trey Mann would have been a great pick here. But, I can't be too harsh on them for taking Trey Murphy. But again, compared to these other teams, it's just they added, a solid role player at 17, which is never a bad thing, considering, how many of these players do end up panning out. But I think they definitely should have banked for a little bit more upside with that pick. And then I'm not sure how much playing time Herbert Jones is going to have from day one. So that's the reason why I have the Pelicans in the C tier. And then my last team that I have in the C tier is the Denver Nuggets, and they walked away from this draft with Nashawn Highland at the 26th pick. I do love Nashawn Highland. I think he's a bigger version of Emmanuel Quickley, and I think he's going to come in and add spacing to this Nuggets team. But excuse me, as much as I do love Nashawn Highland, he's not really what the Nuggets needed. The Nuggets do have, ample spacing and guys like Michael Porter Jr. They have spacing at the wing spots. They got Jamal Murray. Facu is an average 30-point shooter. Marcus Morris had a little bit of a down year, but I think he's going to come in. Monte Morris, excuse me, is going to come in next year and I think he's going to improve on next year. So, they don't really need all that much help at those guard spots. Now. What I really thought that they should have gone out and gotten was a perimeter defender. I think Miles McBride would have been an awesome fit for this Denver Nuggets team, because you take a look at this team. Not sure how much I've stated this before. I think I mentioned it in my mock draft, but their biggest need is perimeter defense. Murray is not a positive impact defender. Facu, as feisty as of a defender as he is only 5'9", so there's a limit to his defensive ceiling. Monte Morris is not a positive impact defender. So I think going out there and getting a high-level perimeter defender with their pick was their number one priority coming into this draft, and they just didn't do that. Now, whether or not they're going to add that in free agency or not, they have limited cap space. That's certainly an option. But again, I think the Nuggets' main goal should have been acquiring a high-level defender with that pick. And as much as I like Nashawn Highland, I think he's going to come in and have an impact for this Nuggets team. He's definitely not what they needed. He's not going to be much of a perimeter defender, and that's exactly what they needed. So he's only going to contribute to the Nuggets' biggest problem and not solve it. And that's why I have the Nuggets in the C tier. So that concludes the C tier, and we shall be moving on to the D tier of teams. Moving on to the D category of teams, first off, I have the Sacramento Kings, who walked away from this draft with a haul of Daveon Mitchell and Nemus Cueta. We can start off with Daveon Mitchell. I really don't understand this pick at all. I don't value Daveon Mitchell all that high. I think he's a little bit better shooting version of Patrick Beverley at the NBA level. I have questions about his shot. I have questions about his touch. I don't get me wrong. He's an amazing defender, and Sacramento definitely had a need on the defensive end, as they were the worst defensive team in basketball last year. And Daveon Mitchell, you can make an argument he's the best perimeter defender in this class, and he's going to have a day one impact for this team. But you take a look at who they have on their roster, right? They already have De'Aaron Fox, their starting point guard. They already have Tyrese Halliburton, their starting shooting guard. So I'm not sure where Daveon Mitchell. He's not big enough where he can slide in, next to these two other guards. and I especially when they have needs at other positions. They have a huge hole at center, and I think they have a huge hole at either of the forward spots. As I don't think Marvin Bagley is going to be there long term, and I definitely see a world where Rashawn Holmes leaves them in free agency. So I'm not too sure about that. I don't understand Daveon Mitchell pick really at all. I think, if they wanted, a defensive guard, they could have gone with a player like Miles McBride with their later pick, targeted him with their second pick, which they used to take Nemus Cueta. But Daveon Mitchell, I think there were just better wings. I would have preferred a Corey Kispert even to the Sacramento Kings instead of Daveon Mitchell. To spend a top 10 pick on really a glorified role player at a position where you pretty much already are set at doesn't really make all that much sense. I've seen some people say, oh, well, thinking too much about the fit. He's the best player on the board, this and that. Daveon Mitchell is not the best player on the board. I'm just sorry to break it to you. But I could definitely see a world where it does work out. But, again, they don't need more guards. It's like Sacramento went through that one period of stretch of time where they drafted all big men, and now they're just drafting all guards. So it's probably in a couple of years they're only going to be drafting wings. But they definitely needed a lot of help at the wing spots, and they drafted another guard who's going to come off the bench. And maybe if they hold on to Buddy Hield, since the trade with the Lakers didn't go through, he's the fourth guard on the roster. when you need help at forward. Doesn't make too much sense to me. Again, he does have he's arguably the best perimeter defender in the draft, and they do need help on defense as they were the worst team in defensive, the worst team on the defensive side of the ball in all of basketball last year. But again, they need Daveon Mitchell's their fourth guard now, assuming they hold on to Buddy Hield, and they need help at the forward spots and as well as the center spot as well. Moving on to their second pick, they picked up Nemus Cueta, who is a big man I like, a two-way big who I think his biggest questions are on the defensive end, which he does have a lack of foot speed. He is a bit slow, but offensively he does show intriguing upside as a playmaker for that big man spot, and as a role man, as he's a very big, strong player. But I'm not completely in love with this pick. Again, it does fill a position of need, but I'm not the biggest fan of Nemus Cueta as we've moved further along in this draft process. So again, you can see the picks on paper, right? You got Daveon Mitchell to improve your defense and Nemus Cueta to fill a position of need. But they're really their biggest spot of need is their forward spots, which they didn't address. They don't have the most cap space in the world. Daveon Mitchell is going to be their fourth guard on their roster. Assuming that they don't trade Buddy Hield, and Nemus Cueta is a backup big at best. So that's for the reason why I have the Kings in the D category. And next up, I have the San Antonio Spurs, who walked away from this draft with a haul of Joshua Primo and Joe Wieskamp. Joshua Primo, the biggest reach in the entire draft. I think you can make an argument was the worst pick in the whole draft. Just really questionable. It's the Greg Popovich, so people are giving him a pass saying, maybe he knows something that we don't, but I really don't think that's the case. I think this is just the end of Greg Popovich, and this was just a really questionable pick. You already got Derek White, DeJounte Murray, Trey Jones, Lonnie Walker, 4 young guards, 4. Now you add a 5th one in Joshua Primo. When you don't have any forwards on the roster. You have Keldon Johnson, who's a good role player, and that's literally it. You have Luka Samanic, who doesn't really see the floor all that much, and they have no forwards now, literally no forwards at all. And I don't see DeMar DeRozan returning to this roster at all. And you go out there and you take the youngest. Joshua Primo is the youngest player in the draft. At a good size, the 6'4", 6'5" size, and is one of the best shooters in this draft. But again, he is very raw in terms of his on-ball creation, and as well as on the defensive side of the floor. But I could see him getting there, and if there is a situation where he could get there, it is it for the San Antonio Spurs. Given how good of a shooter he is, going into how good of a shooting program the Spurs do have, I can definitely see him turning into a very valuable player. But again, you could have gotten Joshua Primo at with their second round pick. There was no need to take him as high as they did, unless the Spurs know something that we don't, which is entirely plausible. But we don't know that, and for them to have taken Joshua Primo as high as they did when they have more clear holes on their roster, when they already have 4 young guards on their team, is pretty very questionable at the very least. And then with their second round pick, I really like Joe White. Joe Wieskamp is really the only reason why I didn't give them an F. I think he can slide in. He's really a 2 guard, but I think he can play some spot 3 minutes, and is, in my opinion, the best shooter in this draft class. Off the ball, I've gone over it plenty of times. I think that he's better than Corey Kispert. I think he's a very good catch. He's not as good of a catch and shoot player as Corey Kispert, but in terms of an overall shooter and like running off of screens, he could create for himself a little bit. He has a little bit of like a diagonal step back move that he goes to a lot. I really like Joe Wieskamp, but he tested well at the combine. If you watched him play in college, he was sneaky athletic. Had some potential in the fast break. I see him being a very valuable role player for the Spurs for a long time to come. It's just that Joshua Primo pick is the reason why I have them in the D tier. Moving on to my third team that I have in the D tier, I have the Washington Wizards, who walked away from this draft class with a haul of Corey Kispert and Isaiah Todd. 2 forwards, more forwards. And if you see a pattern with this D tier, it's teams that draft players with high picks at positions that they are already set at. I understand adding more shooting, but you could have added more shooting at a position of need. You traded Russell Westbrook and you brought in Kyle Kuzma, KCP. Let's just go through the forwards on this Washington roster. Kuzma, Deni Avdija, Rui Hachimura, now Corey Kispert and Isaiah Todd, Davis Bertans. That's 6 forwards. You have one big man in Thomas Bryant, one shooting guard in Bradley Beal. Your point guard right now on the roster is Ish Smith. And you didn't go after a point guard in the draft. Trey Mann, I think, would have been the perfect selection for Washington here, where I understand the rationale in getting more shooting, and Corey Kispert is the best catch-and-shoot shooter in this draft. But, to take a glorified Joe Harris at 15 when there was more, intriguing prospects out there with higher upside than Corey Kispert, who, Washington is still trying to believe in this pipe dream that they can compete for a title when they have Bradley Beal surrounded by a bunch of role players and young players that aren't in positions to succeed. Deni Avdija is not in a position to succeed. Deni Avdija needs the ball in his hands. He's like a jack of all trades, and they relegated him to a catch and shoot player. Rui Hachimura took steps this year, but again, he's not going to be like a high level starter or anything like that. Deni Avdija, a catch and shoot player. Right, this Wizards team can already get buckets. Right, if anything, a player like Daveon Mitchell would have been the pick here for Washington. A Trey Mann would have been a good fit. They needed a point guard. They needed to at least attempt to get a point guard with either of their picks, and they didn't. And to take a player like Isaiah Todd with their second round pick, who I really like Isaiah Todd. I think he's going to be a valuable, floor spacing four. But to take him when you already have players like that, you already relegated Deni Avdija to that role. You already have that player in Davis Bertans. Nobody's going to trade for Davis Bertans on the contract that Washington gave him. They're stuck with that contract. You already have forwards that you have in floor spacing roles. You don't need more of those. You need more guards, right? You don't have a point guard on this roster, right? You could even make an argument, they could have taken a center. They could have taken a player like Isaiah Jackson or Kai Jones, right? When you take a look at, Thomas Bryant coming off an ACL injury, as much as he did improve and as good as he was looking on the offensive end, coming into in the early stages of this year before he tore his ACL, he still is not a positive impact defender. You could have taken a defensive minded center like an Isaiah Jackson with that pick, but you didn't. You added more to what you already have. And you added an older player with limited to no upside in Corey Kispert. And Isaiah Todd, although young and has upside, is really just adding a player in the mold of what you already have in the roster. You already have Davis Bertans, right? Deni Avdija is already a spot-up shooter for you. Rui Hachimura is a shooting four. And you just drafted Corey Kispert. So how many shooting forwards do you really need on this team, Washington, when you have holes at the center position and you have no point guard on the roster? When there's players like Trey Mann, Jared Butler was on the board. Jaden Springer was on the board. Miles McBride was on the board. You could have gone with a plethora of any of those guards. They could have slotted in and been an intriguing fit next to Bradley Beal from day one. I just don't understand what Washington's doing. Just Bradley Beal refuses to ask for a trade. They're going to go through misery next year. I hope that they get Bradley Beal out there quick, fast, and in a hurry, because this draft haul for Washington was questionable at best. They just added to what they already had and did not fill in any holes of their roster, right? When I gave those teams, what did the teams that I gave the highest grades all have in common? They filled holes in their roster with players that were the best at that position and were value adds at that pick. Washington, San Antonio, and Sacramento just added to what they already have, which doesn't make any sense to me. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And moving on to my fourth team in this D tier, I have the Utah Jazz, and they only ended up with Jared Butler walking away from the draft. And I really like Jared Butler. I really, really do. But, Jared, they need perimeter defense at those forward spots, right? I think, even if they only had one pick in this draft, I think they should have gone with a forward. They already have Mike Conley, who, granted is injury prone, but, if they wanted a backup point guard, I think they could have just gone out into free agency and signed one. I don't think they needed to use their draft pick and got one, especially when there were so many, valuable forwards in this draft, especially at that range where Jared Butler went. You got guys like, you got Joe Weiskamp, you got guys like Kessler Edwards from that Brooklyn took, right? forwards that could have came in and contributed on the defensive end from day one for this Utah team. And they really need that at the forward spot. And I like Jared Butler's fit with Utah, but they could have gotten a Jared Butler in free agency, right, for that mid-level exception, right? And especially considering they're probably going to re-sign Mike Conley. And they already have, Donovan Mitchell could do some playmaking. Joe Ingles could do some playmaking. That wasn't really a need for this team. It was perimeter defense, especially at that forward spot. And getting some youth and athleticism and some defensive prowess at that forward spot, considering the fact that those positions are filled by Joe Ingles and Bojan Bogdanovic. So Jared Butler is a solid player. But Utah could have gotten a similar player in free agency with their mid-level exception, and they desperately needed a forward, which they did not do in this year's draft. Granted, they only had a second-round pick, but still. And then moving on to the Bucks, who ended up with Sandro. I'm not even going to pronounce his last name, from Seton Hall, and Georgios. I'm not going to pronounce his last name either. Sandro, I'm from New Jersey. I'm pretty close to Seton Hall. I've watched a good amount of Seton Hall games. Not a big fan of his game. He's really a shot creator at the two. He's barely going to see it. He's not even going to see the floor for this team, so it's not even really worth mentioning. But Georgios, I really like, but I assume he's going to be a draft and stash. So, not much to talk about with the Bucks. They just added players who aren't really going to contribute from day one. And I think that they could have, especially with, some players that did fall. Like, I think Sharif Cooper would have been an interesting pick for this Bucks team. Even a player like Joe Weiskamp, right? They could have added more shooting. They could have added, other more valuable players that fell. And Sandro is not an NBA caliber player. And then Georgios, I doubt, is going to come over to the NBA right away. And the reason why I have the Bucks and D is because none of those players are going to be impact players from day one. And when you take a look at the players that did fall in this year's draft, I think they definitely could have gotten, better value for those picks and players that could help them from day one contribute to winning another title and going far in next year's playoffs. So that concludes my D tier of teams. And finally, we have reached the F tier. These are the teams that I think did the absolute worst in this year's draft, that I think got negative value at almost every pick. Most of these teams only have minimum pick selections, but still, I don't like what any of these teams did in this year's draft, and I think they actually hurt their team moving forward. And to start off, I have the Toronto Raptors at the F tier. And they ended up with a haul of Scottie Barnes, David Johnson, and Delanto Banton. Now, Scottie Barnes, I value him I have him in my big board as a right around 26. And I'll go over it again. Scottie Barnes is going to be a great defender. I'm going to say good, not great. However, offensively, I think a lot of people want to contribute to his playmaking and his intangibles and this and that. Playmaking does not matter in the NBA unless you cannot create your own shot. Scottie Barnes doesn't have a post move. Scottie Barnes is not big enough to barrel to the rim like LeBron or Giannis or Ben Simmons. Scottie Barnes cannot shoot floaters consistently. Scottie Barnes does not have any mid-range game. Scottie Barnes cannot shoot free throws. Scottie Barnes cannot hit open threes. And you expect me to believe that he's going to come into day one and everybody wants to crown it was a horrible pick. It's a horrible pick. You heard rumors of Pascal Siakam being traded. Well, if Pascal Siakam was going to be traded, I'd assume that the trade would have already happened, especially, I don't understand why they would wait till after the trade deadline to deal Pascal Siakam. So it's looking like Scottie Barnes is going to come off the bench and be a negative impact player. I mean, his fit isn't all that bad, but again, he's a solid role player at the very best, and especially in a draft where you have all this talent. Jalen Suggs, as much as I didn't like Jalen Suggs' fit in Toronto, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, he's gonna savior the franchise. He's gonna be our great point guard moving forward." Jalen Suggs would have been Toronto would have automatically been at a C category just by taking Jalen Suggs. Just because he is a great role player, great fit with Toronto, is a great piece to the puzzle moving forward for them. But they end up with Scottie Barnes, a player who his playmaking does not matter at the NBA level if he cannot shoot the ball. He cannot shoot the ball. And his defense is really going to be his only positive asset in the NBA. And to take a player with such high shooting concerns that high in the draft, that is insane negative value for this Toronto team that was really blessed with this opportunity, right? Next year, COVID's not going to be as big of a factor for them. They're going to be back home in Toronto. I expect them to be better next season. They're not going to end up with a top 4 pick. And to use a top 4 pick on a player that is not even going to be able to score 10 points in the NBA, that's automatically an F. And then you take into account David Johnson. I don't think he's going to get NBA minutes from day one. Delonte Banton, a player who I like a lot more than David Johnson, but again, a player I don't expect to get minutes from day one. So none of these players, your highest pick, your 4th overall pick, I see, unless if you trade Pascal Siakam, then maybe he slides in and starts at the 4. But I don't know. Maybe Toronto's, Masai Ujiri's development staff and Nick Nurse's development staff that they have at Toronto, maybe I could see them working with Scottie Barnes and turning him into something. If the shot comes around, then I'll eat my words. I'm saying this now. If the shot comes around for Scottie Barnes, I will eat my words. But I do not see it happening. I don't believe in his touch from all three levels levels of scoring on the court. It was just not a positive impact pick at number 4. And the next 2 players, I don't see them having a positive impact for the Toronto. I don't see them getting much playing time, so that's the reason why I have Toronto in the F category. Moving on to the Memphis Grizzlies, another team. Like, I feel bad for some of the franchises for these teams. Like, I'm getting frustrated talking about the Wizards and the Raptors, and especially the Grizzlies. They traded Jonas Valanciunas was the best player on their team last year. Make no mistake about it. He was hands down their best player next year. Hands down their best player. They traded him for Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams. Negative impact players that are not going to have a positive. Memphis Grizzlies, they're not going to be in the playoff run next year. There's no way. Just by getting rid of their best player and adding 2 negative impact players on big contracts. And they get the 10th pick in the draft. So maybe you'd think, okay, maybe it's not so bad they get the 10th pick in the draft. Then they go out there and use the 10th pick on the draft on Zaire Williams. It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense in the world. I don't know what Memphis is doing. You think that, given how well they've handled their rebuild so far, that they would just continue to get better. They have objectively made themselves much worse. Not only did they trade the best player, Jonas Valanciunas, for 2 negative impact players at this point in their careers in Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams on large contracts, but you take Zaire Williams with the 10th pick in the draft. Zaire Williams, granted, he is 6'9", 6'10", but he can't handle the ball. He can't shoot the ball. People are like, oh, well, he shot better than the percentages say. Well, yeah, but he wasn't a good mid-range shooter either. Like, a lot of people say the same thing about James Bogdanite. Well, he shot horribly from three-point, but he was a damn good mid-range shooter, great free throw shooter, great scoring around the basket, and all you got to do is watch. He has the ability to get open. Zaire Williams did nothing well on the basketball court. He reminds me so much of Kevin Knox. That's what Zaire Williams reminds me of. Kevin Knox. You traded your starting center, your best player in the world, best player on your team, not best player in the world, best player on your team for Eric Bledsoe, Steven Adams, and 2021's draft version of Kevin Knox. I just don't understand what Memphis is doing at all. And then Santi Aldama, the biggest surprise of the first round outside of Joshua Primo, in my opinion. I like him as a player, but again, he's one of my favorite international players in this class. But again, that's just negative value at 30. When you could have gotten more you could have gotten more solid role players. I don't understand what Memphis is doing. I really don't. For a franchise that has handled this rebuild, the Ja Morant era, so well, and gotten such great role players like Desmond Bane, Grayson Allen, Dylan Brooks, Jaren Jackson Jr. as Ja's sidekick. I don't know. It's almost like they're punting their season next year, and Zaire Williams is certainly not going to help them next year at all. Maybe Zaire Williams develops like 3 or 4 years from now into something. Then we could be talking. But I don't understand the rationale in what Memphis was doing. I really don't. It's honestly making me frustrating. So we're just going to move on to the Portland Trailblazers. Selected Greg Brown, and Greg Brown is another player. is almost as bad as Zaire Williams. Again, a freak athlete, the same way how Zaire Williams. Oh, he's a much better. The tape, the numbers don't. You got to watch him play. Like, okay, the same thing with Greg Brown. Incredible athlete, but just a horrible basketball player. Greg Brown, same way as Zaire Williams, does nothing on the basketball court well. He's not a good. He doesn't have any kind of moves. He looks like he's never played basketball before in his life, which he really hasn't. And that's the problem. On a side tangent, that's the problem with these outlets like Overtime and Ball. Is like Greg Brown was supposed to be a top 4 team just because he dunks a lot, just because he was bigger than everybody in high school. Then look at him in college. He couldn't do anything in college. Now he's getting drafted to the Portland Trailblazers when they could have, again, similar to a team like the Grizzlies. They could have used this. They could have just gotten better value. Greg Brown is not an NBA caliber player, and to take a long-term prospect with this pick with everything that's going on with Damian Lillard just doesn't make any sense to me. I think they should have taken a win-now player. It makes absolutely no sense this pick, Greg Brown. Even if he has all the athleticism in the world, there's nothing else positive about Greg Brown's game outside of his athleticism. So it makes literally no sense for them to pick Greg Brown, especially when Damian Lillard is on the verge of asking out. It just doesn't make any sense. And then finally, we have the Boston Celtics, who selected Juan Begarin, another intriguing overseas pick. A 6'7" prototypical wing, but they just traded for Josh Green. Josh Richardson, excuse me. They already have Jalen. Their 2 best players are already wings. I'd imagine they re-signed Evan Fournier after they used that the Gordon Hayward trade exception on him. So they already got 4 wings on the roster, and you draft another one when you need a point guard. You could have at least taken Jared Butler, Sharif Cooper. Sharif Cooper, I thought even with his shooting woes, I think would have been an intriguing fit in Boston, given Jaylen Brown spacing the floor, Jason Tatum spacing the floor, Evan Fournier spacing the floor, even Peyton Pritchard could space the floor, and Al Horford could space the floor too. You give Sharif Cooper a wide open lane with his playmaking creativity, that would have been an interesting fit. But instead, you go with another forward when you already got 4 forwards on the roster, assuming that they re-sign Evan Fournier. Just doesn't make any sense. And that's really it for the FTR. It's gotten me frustrated talking about these 4 teams. But the way that I graded these teams, if you see a pattern, it's the teams that filled out their holes in their roster with value picks, especially at the picks that they had. And the lower the teams, you could see that the players just weren't good fits at all and not good value for their picks. So I'm not even going to talk about any of these 4 teams anymore because it's frustrating me. So that's the end of Tier F, and that's the end of my my NBA 2021 draft grades. And that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I know it was a really long video, but I just wanted to get out all my thoughts on the 2021 draft and be done with it. Moving forward, there's going to be no more draft talk for a while. I do plan on releasing a way too early mock draft big board for the 2022 NBA draft, but that's not going to come for a while. I want to delve into more free agency stuff and, more team preview stuff. But again, as previously stated, I value teams that, took players that were at positions of need, as well as value picks for where they selected. And, you saw that trend all the way down from, teams that the A tier did that really well and teams that the F tier, did that not well at all. So that's how I graded my draft. It was a very fun draft, very weird draft. There was a lot of surprises, a lot of head scratchers. But again, it was a very fun draft, and my first draft that I covered on this channel, and I can't wait to do more. And I appreciate you guys if you stuck all the way to the end of the video. And again, I just want to say thank you guys so much for the support. I just started this channel, this month. July's almost over in one more day, but again, I started the channel this month, and I've grown a lot. I've reached a lot of people, and I'm planning on doing working with some other people that I've really looked up to my entire life, and now getting to sit here and work with these people as peers, it's a blessing. It's a blessing, and just thank you so much for the support, guys. And I'm gonna keep pumping out content for you guys, and I love doing this, getting to talk about the NBA. Like I am, it's a blessing, and just thank you so much for the support, guys. And thank you again for those of you that stuck through the entire video. I really appreciate it. This video took a lot of time to make, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. But again, thank you so much for the support, guys, and I'm gonna head out now. I hope you guys have a good day. Stay safe, stay blessed, and peace.